Hello, everyone, and welcome to FaM Sports Varsity. I'm your host, Frank Langella, joined by my co-host, Marcilio Langella. And Mars, this is our Section 1C, D, and Independent League team preview, our final team preview show. As the season, football is in the air, obviously, and the season is kicking off this week. Practices begin. You can feel the electricity in the air. And it's just a great feeling. Football is back.
Yeah, man. I mean, starting Monday, practices are going to be in full swing for most programs, and I think we've been all waiting for this. I think just imagine this. In the fall, football was up in the air. We didn't know what was going to happen, especially with New York being one of those states that didn't have football progressing, while a lot of the others, not a lot, but some states around New York were progressing, and finally, here we are, having a condensed season, but having a season nonetheless. And I think that's just excitement all around.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, you guys can follow us on Twitter. We'll be covering the Section 1 football in the Independent League throughout the season. You can follow us on Twitter. You can see on the banner. You can follow us on Instagram. You can check out our website at fansportsny.com, which has all of the stuff there as well. And you're obviously watching this from YouTube. So make sure you give a thumbs up. Share the video, give us feedback, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be producing a lot of material and really excited to produce some great coverage for Section 1 football. And, I mentioned previously, Mars, this is going to be C, D, and the Independent League. So there are a bunch of teams we need to cover, so I'm going to try to move through it pretty quickly, and then we'll go into some discussions. And just a disclaimer, we got to speak to a bunch of the coaches that we've from these teams, not all of them. And when we talk about projected starters, obviously, we've mentioned this a bunch of times in the other videos, Mars. This doesn't necessarily mean the starters are in place already. Obviously, this is what practices are for. These are what the workouts are for. And if we didn't mention you, that doesn't mean that, this isn't your time to shine, right? So anyone who isn't mentioned, even those that are mentioned, there's no guarantee that, you're going to have a good season, right? You need to put in the hard work. You need to be ready to go, and this is what this next coming weeks are going to be all about.
Yeah, man. Exactly. It's all about preparation.
Absolutely.
It's all about giving everything you got. Enjoy the season and enjoy every practice you have.
Absolutely, and that's a great point to start it off. But let's just talk generally of the different leagues, and then we'll dive into the teams. Mars, in C back in 2019, Valhalla defeated Dobbs Ferry for the 1C championship. But C has also gone through some changes since then, right? Bronxville has moved down to C from B. Rhinebeck, who was in the Independent League, has moved to C, right? So C has been bolstered up a little bit. And on the D side, Tuckahoe, it's that annual Tuckahoe versus Haldane rivalry. In 2019, Tuckahoe defeated Haldane to become the 1D champion. And in the Independent League, and when you look back in the Independent League, there's now this time around there's going to be 2 leagues for the Independent. But last time in 2019, Edgemont defeated Briarcliff in their championship version of the Independent League. So that's how things went in 2019. And now this year coming up, a lot of things are different. In the Independent League, you have new additions, right? Peekskill, Poughkeepsie, Ossining, Ramapo, Mount Vernon. They're all joining the fray. So the Independent is going to be cut up into 2 different leagues. And it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But let's start with C. And C is where we're going to dive into, Mars. And we'll start with the champion and the challenger from 2019, and then everyone else is random after that. And it starts with Valhalla, who won the championship, coached by Art Trollio, longtime Harrison coach. This is one of when he left, he was one of the top coaches in Section 1, and he's coming back into Section 1, which makes things very interesting. In 2019, obviously, they went 8-3. They won versus Dobbs Ferry. 2019 was the most wins they've had since 2015, when they also had 8 wins, Mars. Coach Trollio, I think he's at 197 career wins. He's 3 wins away from 200, which is a big milestone. But let's just talk about this team. They won a championship. Offensively, they lost some players, but they're bringing back a bunch of others, right? So offensively, they're projected about 6 of 11 starters coming back. Their quarterback is coming back. But the big question is going to be on the offensive line, where they're only expecting 1 out of the 5 offensive linemen to come back. Defensively, 6 of the 11 starters. All their linebackers are back, a bunch of secondary guys. But on the defensive line, Mars, none of the defensive linemen are expected to return, 0 out of the 4. So obviously you could tell the big question is going to be up front. And Valhalla had a really nice mixture of skill guys and were able to control the line of scrimmage, which torpedoed them to a championship run. Now, the skill guys seem to be coming back, but the question is how are they going to handle the offensive and defensive lines But when I spoke to Coach, he likes to bring a balanced attack, combo of spread and option under center. So Valhalla is going to look a little bit different than what we saw in 2019. And defensively, he wants to establish that defensive front. He's big on effort. He's big on swarming to the defense, swarming to the ball, and showing urgency. And that's something that Coach wants to implement. And, the goals, we hear this a lot from the coach. They want to compete. They want to learn how to handle adversity. And, the question we talked about, O-line and D-line. Coach recognizes that is going to be the big question for this team. And these next couple weeks of practice are going to be big. But let's talk about the players that we know are coming back. And quarterback Michael Dawson starts with him, right? The junior, Frank's finest all-state football player. I love his anticipation. I love his ability to, he's a bit of a gunslinger. He's going to take chances, give his wide receivers chances, but he made some wow throws on intermediate and outside the number throws that, he's a key cog of this team. He's the guy who gets all these skill guys the ball, and he does a pretty darn good job of it. And, we talked a lot about him, but Michael Dawson, our Frank's finest quarterback for the C class, an impressive kid. But let's go to another one, Frank's finest wide receiver defensive back, Mahari Davis. This kid is explosive. He's an explosive guy on offense. He's a smooth athlete, so he can beat you going deep. He can catch the short routes, make you miss. Solid route runner. Kid 6'1", so solid size kid. Could put definitely a little more muscle on, a little bit thin, but he is one of the best two-way players in the class. He's going to be an important cog. Another one, outside linebacker and wide receiver, Rashawn Melvin, the senior. He was a Frank's finest on both sides of the ball. At the outside linebacker spot, Mars, really disruptive. I mean, we talked about in the Frank's finest, he can rush the passer, he can stop the run, he can drop into coverage. This kid is a dynamic defensive player. And on the offensive side, he's 6'4", 190 pounds. Big target, big red zone target, 50-50 ball guy. Goes up, makes contested catches, really good football player. But I talk about the offensive line, and this is going to be a key player right here, Jack Sullivan, the junior. He's the center and linebacker. He's got to anchor that offensive line, right? He's going to be the leader of the offensive line because everyone else is going to be new. So he's one of the returning players. He's not a tall guy, but he's strong. He moves his feet well. And on the defensive side of the ball, he's one of those linebackers coming back. It's going to be an important aspect of their defense. He has a good nose for the football. Another kid that I mentioned, outside linebacker, wide receiver, another weapon, another linebacker, Joe O'Neal, the senior. I think he's an underrated football player. He shows the speed that he can rush the passer. He definitely needs to build up on his strength, but I like this kid's athleticism. I think he is an underrated outside linebacker, and he's going to be an important player going on to the offensive side of the ball, just creating another weapon for Michael Dawson. But let's talk about the running game, and that's going to be another big thing. I mentioned all these receivers. Who's going to be the lead back? And I think Joe Nolan, the senior, will be that guy. Not the fastest guy, but he has some nice lateral wiggle to him, and he runs with strength. He's not easy to bring down in open field. He's going to be important. Another guy, Danny Tamaro, defensive back, kicker. He got the ball a few times I saw last year. Another guy who's going to be important in the run game, important on the back end, another important two-way guy. And another guy to keep in mind, young football player, Lorenzo Robinson, the freshman. Young guys, and when we get to the smaller schools, you see some of those young guys coming to varsity early, and they can make an impact right away. And this is someone coach, like the work he put in the offseason, someone to keep in mind. But, just my overall evaluation of the team, they have all the skills, right? Linebackers, defensive backs, wide receivers, quarterback, running back, they will have that. Question is, can they control the front? Offensive and defensive line, that's going to be the key for this team. Going to the team they played, Mars Dobbs Ferry, coached by Joe Cox. In 2019, they went 5-4. They lost to Valhalla in the championship, like we talked about. Dobbs Ferry has kind of run the show in C, consistently run the show in C for a long time. 9 straight years of over 500, Mars. The last time they were 500 was 2010 when they were 4-4. They won multiple titles. This is one of those prominent programs in C. When you talk about Class C, Dobbs Ferry in recent memory is one of those guys. Offensively, they're expected 6 of the 11 starters back, bringing back their quarterback. And this is important. Offensive line, 3 of the 5 offensive linemen. But we talk about the smaller schools have young people on their team, Mars. They potentially have no senior on the O-line. So even though they bring back 3 of the 5, none of them are upperclassmen, right? None of them are seniors. So it's still going to be some youth on that offensive line. Defensively, they're also expecting 6 of the 11 starters back. And when I spoke to Coach about the team, Mars, offensively, they want to be more consistent. They run that triple option offense. The offense showed a little bit of inconsistency. Sometimes they were on, sometimes they were off. he wants the attention to detail to be raised. He wants that consistency in that triple option to be there. They had injuries last year. They had to move around a couple people. So it was a little bit of speed bumps along the way for the offense. Defensively, they want to be more physical. At times, you know, they struggled, especially on the back end. So coach definitely recognizes they want to bolster up the defense. And the goal is they want to win a championship. I mean, there's a lot of young guys that are going to need to grow into theirs, which is the big question for Coach has on this team. How fast can those young guys get into varsity speed? But the goal is to win a championship. And when you look at some of the players, I think it has to start with their quarterback, linebacker, defensive back, Harry Dan. He was on Frank's finest at the defensive back spot. Great two-way player. He's a great leader. I really like his speed. He's got an explosive running ability to him. They run that triple option, so he's perfect for that. He's got that 4.65 speed, so good speed. And he runs with strength. He doesn't look like an overpowering guy, but he runs through arms tackles. He makes people miss. This guy is an important key for this offense, and he's one of the more dangerous players in this class on the offensive side of the ball. Defensive side of the ball, he's a kid who could do a little bit of everything. Right? He can play man-to-man. He can drop into zone coverage. He plays the run pretty well. He tackles pretty well. I really like this kid as a football player, and I think he's going to have a big year. Another kid to keep in mind, Mars, James McGovern, defensive back and running back. He was a Frank's finest defensive back, smooth athlete, good speed. Kind of plays that wing back where he'll go out for passes, he'll go out for passes, catch passes. He'll run sweeps in the triple option. They'll pitch to him, counters, and he's once he gets into the open field, he has that speed to hit big chunk plays. Really smooth athlete. I like him. He's another important cog, two-way player. He's going to be big for this team. A senior, again, like Harry Dan, is going to have to lead this team. Another to keep in mind on the offensive and defensive line. Jose Regalado, Frank's finest. We talked about him. This kid, 5'11", 280 pounds. Not tall, but wide kid. And for a big man like that, you expect him to be slow-footed, and he's not. He's pretty nimble. He's got good, solid feet on both sides. He's got that strength because he has that low center of gravity, Mars. He really brings some power on the offensive line side. And on the defensive side, he moves pretty well. It's hard for linemen to get underneath him because he's not that tall, but he's strong. Really solid football player. He's a junior. He's going to have to be that anchor on the O-line. Another kid to keep in mind, Brian Dan on the offensive line. Sophomore, Marcy. He was a freshman last year. Played center. This kid, 5'10", 200 pounds. Decent-sized kid. He does a really good job of turning the defender. And you being a former center, you don't always have to blow somebody 6 yards off the ball. What you got to do, you got to be able to turn the guy out of the hole. You got to be able to move the line of scrimmage. And this kid actually did a pretty good job of that as a young football player. I'm interested to see his jump from his freshman to sophomore year. Another guy to keep in mind, offensive tackle, David Farnsworth, the junior. And then finally, one more running back and linebacker, Jabari Marsland, another junior. Right, so I mentioned a bunch of juniors with a couple seniors that are going to lead the way. This team's going to have some youth to them. I'm interested to see how fast these kids can develop. I think they have talent at each level. They have talent at the quarterback. They have talent at the running back. They have talent at the offensive line. But everything's got to come together. Where does the synergy come from? Big question to me, linebackers, offensive line. Those are the two big questions to me on both sides of the ball. I'm interested to see these next couple weeks of practice on how they solve it, Mars. Who do you want to talk about?
So I'm going to actually talk about both teams. I'll focus firstly on Valhalla. I mean, the big thing I noticed right away is that you're losing a lot of your offensive line, and that's going to be a difficult thing. Now, granted, we just may not know who the players are going to be filling in all the spots right away, which it doesn't necessarily mean that the O-line will be a big question, but it's really just going to be who will step in and how well did they play going into those spots. But one thing you definitely mentioned that they have is a lot of skill players. They have quite a lot of them. I mean, Michael Dawson at quarterback is fantastic. I mean, Frank's finest, obviously, he has great anticipation. He's great touch on his throws. And I think he'll be a really big piece to obviously help the offense move forward, obviously, as a starting quarterback. But not even just him. You have a lot of wide receivers, and you have, obviously, some backs. I mean, like you mentioned, Joe Nolan is going to be a lead back for them this year. But the question that I already mentioned was the offensive line, right? Offensive line, defensive line, having that front four or front five on the offensive side that will win the trenches. Like that's going to be the big question going forward. That's going to be the X factor for me, whether or not they can fill those spots effectively. That will really give them a good start to the season, because if they're young guys filling in, they might get better as the season progresses. But it's really going to depend on who is in those spots, right? And then I'll move on to Dobbs Ferry. Now you take a look at a different point of view where they have 3 of the 5 offensive linemen returning, and they're all young. Like that's the difference. Is Valhalla could be in the same position where they have a lot of young guys in. It's just we don't know necessarily any returning starters, right? Dobbs Ferry had young guys playing last year, and they're still young, and they're starting this year. But similar to the fact that they have skill players that will help and bolster their offense. Harry Dan is a hell of an athlete in the type of offensive scheme that they run. You need to have a quarterback that can move and really make plays, and he does so. I really like this young guys with a lot of depth to them. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with both these teams because I feel like they're both going to be obviously contenders for that title. And obviously if the title ends up happening, so I'm wondering to see how they play this season.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the remaining 3 teams. And again, this is random. It's not based on how we think of how talented that they are. But let's start with Rhinebeck. They were in the independent league last year. They moved to C this year. Coach Ianello. He's been there a long time. In 2019, they went 5-4. They lost to Irvington in the 3rd place game, which they had in the independent league. Back-to-back winning seasons for the first time since 2013, 2014, Mars. And offensively, I think they're going to be loaded this year. They're bringing back 8 of the 11 starters. They're bringing back their quarterback on the offensive line. 4 of the 5 offensive linemen are coming back, Mars. The big question is going to be defense. Defense struggled a little bit last year, 28.9 points a game they gave up. They're returning, I think, about 6 of the 11 starters. We didn't get to speak to coach, but a lot of guys are turning on offense, and the big question is going to be defense to me. And it's got to start with their quarterback, Evan Falco. This kid, I know Michael Dawson, he was our Frank's finest, and C&D has a pretty good bunch of quarterbacks, right? There's a bunch of quarterbacks that can compete with each other. I really like this kid, Evan Falco. I think he is a college quarterback. And this kid listed at 6'3", 210 pounds, right? Tall, well-built. I love his mobility. He made some really wow throws when you watch him over the middle. He made some intermediate throws that really, caught you off guard. It was like, wow, this kid has a quick release. He moves around in the pocket, makes guys miss, resets his feet, makes a throw, and he can also hurt you running the ball. This kid is probably going to be one of the most feared quarterbacks in the class in C and D, and I know C is playing D, so he's going to be the most feared quarterback probably this year. And he's got some weapons around him, which really makes things interesting. I think he's going to have a tremendous season. And it starts with Luke Murphy, wide receiver and defensive back, the junior. I thought he was one of their most active defensive players coming back. So if the defense needs to improve, this is where it's going to start. It's going to be Luke Murphy because I think he was a pretty solid defensive back. On the offensive side, he's going to be one of the top targets. This kid, 6 feet, decent-sized kid, solid speed. On the defensive side, he had nose for the football. He's going to be an important two-way player for this team. I know he's still a junior, but I'm interested to see that sophomore to junior jump. Another junior, Mars, on the wide receiver, Steven D'Erico. This kid, another wide receiver. Yeah, I think he lined up in the slot a little bit last year, but another target for Evan Falco. And at the running back spot, running back and linebacker, Dimitri Hilton. I think he's going to be the X factor. He might be the lead back for the team. Evan Falco can both run and throw. And he's going to be every defensive coordinator's main target to stop. Is there somebody else? Is there going to be that next guy who can run the ball and set the tempo up for the team? That's why I believe he could be the X factor for this team. The junior, they need to find a lead back. It's not just going to be Evan Falco running the ball. And I'm interested to see what they do at that spot. But let's talk about where I think the strength of this offense is outside of their quarterback and some of the weapons, and that's up front. Let's talk about offensive lineman and linebacker. Joey Pulcino, the junior, he was our Frank's finest on the offensive line, Mars. 6'2", 210 pounds, moves his feet really well. He can pull, he can trap block. I think he does a solid job blocking at the second level. I'm really interested to see his jump from last year to this year. I think this kid could be a really good offensive lineman. He's got good length. Obviously, he could put on a little bit of muscle, but solid-sized kid. Another guy, I think the senior, going to have to be an anchor on the offensive line, Jeremy Allen. He was at the center spot. 6'2", 220 pounds. He's going to be another important two-way guy. They got to figure it out. I mentioned these guys on the offensive line. They got to play both ways, and we got to see, can they step up and make the defense a better unit than last year? And I think they can. But another guy, offensive lineman and kicker. He was our Frank's finest kicker, Christian Frabasili, the senior. And then finally, to wrap it all off, actually 2 more offensive linemen because, they're bringing back a bunch of these guys. Emilio Reza, the junior, and Zach Penna, the junior. So I just mentioned a bunch of kids, right? Some pretty big body kids. This is what, Rhinebeck could end up being the most dangerous offense in C and D, in my opinion, because they got the quarterback, who I believe is one of the best players in C and D. They have an offensive line in front of them that could move some people, protect the quarterback. If they're able to do that, this could be a very dangerous offense. The question for this team is obviously defense. I think they'll have one of the most talented, first 11, and then depth is going to come into question. So defense to me is number one. Depth is going to come into number two for Rhinebeck. I mentioned a bunch of juniors, right? They weren't all seniors that I just mentioned. A bunch of juniors, so they are still a little bit young outside of some of the main components. So this is another interesting team for me in Rhinebeck, going from the independent to C. They can make some noise this year. Let's move to the next team, Bronxville, and they went from moved from the Class B down to C. Coach Maganelli, and he's been there since 2017. In 2019, they went 4-4. They lost to Byram Hills in the quarters. Like I mentioned, they moved from 1C to B. 2019 was their most wins since 2015. And they're looking to be over 500 for the first time since 2014. And I'll tell you right now, Mars, I think they're bringing back one of the most talented rosters in C and D. And offensively, they're going to return 7 of the 11 starters. They did lose 2 of their wide receivers, but they're bringing back their quarterback. And another important thing we talked about, offensive line. 4 of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. Defensively, 7 of the 11 starters coming back, Mars. And when I spoke to Coach, first off, he wanted to give a shout-out to his JV coach, Dan Martin. He says he does a really good job. Pretty much of their you can't be a continued successful program without a good JV. And he says Coach Martin has done a really good job of preparing these kids for the varsity move, and he wanted to give a shout out to him. But on the offensive side of the ball, he wants the offense to be more explosive. He wants more big chunk plays, and that's something he definitely wants to implement defensively. They like to play simple. They like to fly to the ball, and he wants to make sure everyone knows their read. You can't do that unless everyone knows what their job is and does their job. So he likes to keep things simple. There's not going to be a lot of different flavors. He just wants them being ready and flying to the football. And he really wants his program to take the next step. He feels that this team could do that if they're ready to go. And, when you look at the players coming back, Mars, you know why. It starts, obviously, one of my favorite players in the class. I think one of the best players in Section 1 altogether, Henry Donahue, quarterback, running back, linebacker. This kid, well-built kid at 5'11", 200 pounds. We spoke a lot about him on the Frank's Finest. I don't have to get too deep into it, but he really is a key cog on both sides of the ball. Offensively, he is the leader of the team. Offensively, he can hurt you throwing the ball. He can hurt you running the ball. He really runs like a fullback. He wears 24 at the linebacker spot. I love his ability to read an offense, attack the line of scrimmage, and finish. That's an important thing. Sometimes linebackers do everything right until the final part, which is tackle consistently, and he does that. Let's move to the next player, Mars. Connor Randall, and another Frank's Finest kid, running back and defensive back, really explosive football player. He has that, home run speed, or the oh-no speed we like to say, as a defensive coordinator. When he gets to the open field, he can hit big chunk plays. This kid, multi-sport athlete. He's going to play lacrosse and football in college. He's going to be an important two-way player for them as well. Another kid who I think could be a breakout player for them, Will Murray, fullback and linebacker. This kid, at 5'10", 185 pounds, and he's an important two-way player. And they're going to have to find somebody else who can help take the load off Henry. And could this kid do that? I know Connor's kind of that outside runner, but who could be that in-between the tackles runner? And that's going to be a big question. On the other side of the ball, he's a linebacker who's going to be next to Henry, right? So that guy's going to have a lot of opportunities because teams are going to be focused on Henry. They're going to make sure Henry's got to be blocked. So there's going to be opportunity for a guy like Will Murray to make a bunch of plays, and I think he could do that, and that's why I think he could be a breakout player. Let's move to the front, Mars, where I think they're going to be pretty strong. Offensive lineman and defensive lineman, George McCormick. This kid was a Frank's Finest on the defensive side of the ball. Really explosive, disruptive defensive lineman. 5'9", 225 pounds. Not very tall, but he wins with his first step. He's a penetrator, and he shows the strength not to get pushed off the spot. Another important two-way player for this team because he's going to have to be that way on the offensive side of the ball too. He's going to have to move some people. But another guy we have, TJ Curran. He was a Frank's Finest on the offensive line. He's going to play on defense as well. This kid is the captain of the O-line when I spoke to Coach about him. Wide-bodied kid, not the tallest guy, but he is an anchor on the offensive line. He's got good strength. He's got to be able to move people. And he also has pretty solid feet for a big man, right? So he can pull. I'm not talking like big sweeping pulls where he's going to block people at the second level, but he can get out there. And, that's an important part. But the big thing is big-bodied kid. He can move people. Another offensive lineman to keep in mind, Mars, Peyton Beldotti. This kid, 5'11", 195 pounds, a little bit more of the athletic offensive lineman, but another important guy on the offensive front. Got to be able to control the fronts, Mars. Right, that's going to be huge. And people who can control fronts are going to make, they're going to be the most successful teams. And there's going to be another kid out there. Another kid to keep in mind, Tommy Garofalo, the junior defensive end, Riley Ramundo. This kid, Riley, he was a disruptive edge defender. I'm interested to see his jump from his junior to senior year. And another lineman, Mars, Preston Mays, the junior offensive lineman. Again, you don't just need 5, right? A lot of teams are going to need that 6th guy, too, because we know injuries are going to happen this year. Can you get all 5 guys? Can you get that extra guy? That would be huge for a team. But I want to tell you who my X factor for this team is, Mars. And it's Connor O'Neill, the junior. Now, this kid, I can call him quarterback, and that's where he's really going to be practicing. But he's really an athlete. He's a two-way player. I know he lined up at quarterback, running back. He lined up at outside linebacker. This kid is a very intriguing player. And when I spoke to Coach, he said something really interesting to me. And he said there's going to be a quarterback competition. And I was like, wait a minute. Thinking in my head, like, Henry had a fantastic year. What is a competition going to be? But he wants to try out some of these quarterbacks so that Henry can move around, that Henry doesn't have to stay a quarterback. Maybe he can play at running back. He can be his best player, which is a versatile football player. And a guy like Connor O'Neill might be that guy who could step in at quarterback and spell Henry. This kid's 6'4", 205 pounds, Mars. He's got really solid speed at running about a 4.6. And I really just like his versatility. He's a really smooth athlete. Solid release at the quarterback spot. But this is someone who could be really intriguing. This kid's going to play. The question is where, right? So can he take that quarterback spot? Can he spell Henry to play in another spot where he could probably be more versatile and more to his strengths? I'm really interested to see it. But there's another quarterback too. Teddy Dolan, another junior guy. I'm interested to see this quarterback battle, right? And not so much that it's a knock on Henry at all, but this could make this offense even more dynamic if that Henry's got to move around, which is going to make defensive coordinators sweat. Another guy, defensive back, Mars, Ben Davis, the senior. I thought he made some really nice plays in coverage. This is somebody on the back end who could definitely help. And wide receiver and outside linebacker, John Monahan, another weapon, right? Because in the passing game, they lost 2 wide receivers. They're going to need a couple receivers to come in and make some plays because they lost a couple good wide receivers last year. So who's going to step up on that? Final, Mars, before we go into the discussion, let's go to Woodlands. And coached by Anthony Fava in 2019. They went 2-6. They lost to Dobb Ferry in the semifinals. I know it was a little bit of a tough year because Woodlands has been pretty competitive in C over these last few years. But in 2018, they went 7-2, right? So, they've really been a competitive force in C. 2019 was their fewest wins since, I believe, 2009. So they're definitely trying to get right back on track. Good news is they're bringing back some players, right? Offensively, 7 of the 11, but they do got to replace some skill, some significant skill guys, Deshaun Allen, Amari Kendrick. So they got to replace the quarterback. But offensive lineman-wise, Mars, 5 out of the 5 coming back. Right, so offensive line, I know it was a struggle last year for this team, but all 5 guys are expected to come back. That will definitely help, especially if they can make that jump. Defensively, 6 of the 11 starters. They lost 4 really important guys, especially at the inside linebacker position. They lost both inside linebackers, but the entire defensive line is back, right? Same guys playing offense are usually playing the defensive side of the line, and so that will definitely help. But the big question is linebackers. How are they going to develop linebackers? It's going to be hard during this condensed season. When I spoke to Coach offensively, they want to be more balanced. They were very pass-heavy the last couple of years. Obviously, with their quarterbacks that they've had, you know why they wanted to throw the ball. The big question for him is, who are they going to develop to be the next quarterback? Defensive side of the ball, they want to use their athleticism. They want to use their speed to get to the ball. And middle linebackers are going to be very inexperienced. This is going to be a work in progress, especially on the defensive side. But speaking of the players, Mars, I got to start with one of my favorite players on this team, Isaiah Hargett, outside linebacker, strong safety, and wide receiver. He was a Frank's finest at the outside linebacker spot. He played through injury last year, but he was an active defender, solid finisher, and he made some nice plays for them on the edge. I'm expecting big things from him. Another kid to keep in mind, kind of the Swiss Army knife of this team, and that's KJ Leak, Mars. He plays lines up at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, safety. This kid is a weapon. I think he could be the breakout player. He's one of the kids competing for the quarterback position. It's kind of going to be a quarterback by committee this year. I know Coach talked about it. There's going to be a few guys going in there. But I think this kid is going to be a weapon no matter where he lines up, at the quarterback, running back spot, or wide receiver. He's got good speed, and he's a good athlete. Another kid to keep in mind, quarterback, wide receiver, and defensive back, Amir Young. He was second on the team in interceptions, third on the team in touchdowns. This kid made plays. He's my X factor because he he made some significant plays when you weren't expecting. When you had other guys like Kendrick and Allen and stuff like that, KJ Leak, he made some nice plays last year for this team. And I think if he can continue that and build on that, he will be an X factor for this offense and the X factor on the defensive side of the ball because I think they're returning some solid defensive backs. So it's going to be important. Another quarterback competing for it, Thomas Gabriel, young kid, sophomore. This is going to be another interesting dynamic, Marcia, another quarterback competition, and we're going to find out who's going to take the reins or take the significant reins. Another kid to keep in mind, defensive back, wide receiver, David Gonzalez, a sophomore, wide receiver, running back, outside linebacker, Brian Burkett, and then another wide receiver, Desmond Washington. You're going to see these are the type of guys who are going to have to make some significant plays for whoever wins the quarterback job, whether it's running the ball or catching passes. And then on the offensive line, because I mentioned 5 of the 5 guys coming back, Coach talked about he wants to see these kids make a jump because last year on the offensive line was a bit of a struggle. And to me, it got to start with guys like Dalton Hudson, right? This kid, the senior, 6'4", 245 pounds, well-built kid. I'm interested to see his jump and all of their offensive linemen, Mars. Shamari Burton, the senior. So the big question for this team, Mars, quarterback spot. Who wins the quarterback battle? And do these offensive and defensive linemen make the jump? That's what they need to make a jump from last year because they're bringing back these guys. These guys could set the tempo for this team and make these weapons have a lot more space to work with. Defensive side of the ball, linebacker is going to be big, right? It's hard to develop linebackers without practice time. Who is going to be those guys that take the reins at the linebacker spot? Because I think defensive back-wise, I think they'll be pretty solid. Marsh, who do you want to talk up to wrap up C?
Well, I'm going to talk about Bronxville. I really like this plethora of talent that they have. I mean, you kind of mentioned the fact that, we already know Henry Donahue is a top-tier talent in Section 1 in general, but now you're going to add in a guy like Connor O'Neill, who's a young talent, and could even, could just add to what this offense can do, right? I mean, as a coach, you can't hate on talent. You're not going to just say, well, you know what, you're not going to play because we have a guy in the spot. No, you never do that as a coach.
And if he can take that, I'll let you. If you take that quarterback spot, now you have Henry playing somewhere. You have Connor Randall. You have Will Murray. Now this offense could even be even more dynamic.
I mean, that's the point. I mean, you have all these weapons around you, and now you're just going to add in another one. And I mean, we can go all day about Henry Donahue, but like you mentioned, Connor Randall, Will Murray. These are guys that will add on to this offense. But one thing I really wanted to key in on was the offensive line returning. The 4 out of the 5 is really crucial because, especially in a condensed season like this, having a lot of returning guys, specifically in the offensive line, where you don't have to teach them the new techniques or anything. They're kind of just in the same general ballpark.
And that they've had synergy together.
Yeah, synergy. They work well together. They know how to make all the calls on the offensive line for every play. That's going to be crucial to the start of the season. I'm really looking at George McCormick and really want to see how he progresses, how he really establishes himself as a top-tier offensive line talent like he already has since he's on the Frank's Finest list. But just the rest of the guys, TJ Curran, Peyton Belladati, and Tommy Garofalo are all dudes that I think together are melding well. And I'm looking forward to see who's going to be that last spot, who's going to take the spot and really help this offense grow. But at the end of the day, Bronxville is a dangerous team. They have a lot of talent and good coaching, and it's really going to be who can organize their team the best, and especially in this condensed season, this condensed off season that we've noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And now let's move to D, Mars. And we talked about D, Tuckahoe. It's kind of that annual Tuckahoe versus Haldane. And in 2019, Tuckahoe defeated Haldane. And we'll start with Tuckahoe, and coached by John DiArco Jr. And this is his first year back. His father, I think, was a longtime coach for Tuckahoe, so familiar face for sure. In 2019, they went 9-2. They had a really good season. We mentioned that they defeated Haldane. 2019 was their most wins since 2012, when they also had 9 wins. They haven't had back-to-back winning seasons, Mars, since 2011, 2012. So could this year be different? Could they break that mold? Could they get that back-to-back winning season? And they lost some talent, but they are going to bring back some familiar phases offensively. 5 of the 11 starters coming back. They do have to replace their quarterback, but this is what's going to be big for them. Offensive line-wise, Mars, 4 to the 5 offensive linemen come back, and that's going to be really important. Obviously, with 4 of the 5 coming back and 5 total starters, it means you lost a lot of skill players. A lot of skill players, including the quarterback spot. Defensively, they did lose a lot of talent as well. 4 to the 11 starters coming back. And when I spoke to Coach, the team is definitely going to look a little different. Offensively, he likes to mix it up, but his identity that he wants to create is being able to run the ball, and he believes that helps you win late in season. And I tend to agree when the weather gets worse, and this is going to be weird in the spring because actually as the season goes on, the weather's actually going to get nicer.
Yes.
So it's a little unusual, But the identity is to run the football. He wants to control the tempo, but he is going to go into some spread as well. So he's going to mix it up. Defensively, he has an attacking style defense. He likes to create a lot of pressure. They don't want to have shootouts, right? So they want to be able to control the tempo of the game. They want to be able to defend, keep people out of the end zone. Last year saw a lot of high scoring games at Tuckahoe. They kind of want to establish a different identity, which I found to be interesting. And the goals for coach, they have 4 seniors on the team, Mars. They want the seniors to have an enjoyable season. And again, that's kind of when you take a step back and think this is really important that a season's happening for these seniors. But the goal has been set too, that they want to win every game, right? I mean, Tuckahoe, they want to win. Coaches wants to continue that trend. And that's an important goal for him. When you look at the players, it's got to start, to me, with running back and defensive back Michael Myers, the junior. Mars, he was a Frank's finest, captain of the team. He's going to have a large workload. We talked, the coach wants to run the ball. Well, you can run the ball with a guy like Michael Myers because he can do a little bit for you. He can hit, he can run between the tackles because he runs hard. He can run outside, use his speed. This kid's a baseball player. This is a very good athlete. And if they want to establish the run, this is a guy who can create an identity of running the football with this team. He's going to be an important football player. I don't like calling Frank's, breakout players Frank's finest players because we expect them to have good seasons being on the Frank finest list, but I think this kid is going to have a really good season. Another kid, let's talk about the offensive line. And they bring back 4 of the 5 guys. It starts with Rob Seifer, offensive lineman and linebacker, really important two-way player. He was a Frank's finest for our team, Mars. He's got a real nastiness to him on the offensive line. He's trying to punish you. And he's a thumper on the defensive side. This kid is going to be an important cog, two-way player for this team. Another kid to keep in mind, Nicholas Santucci, the offensive lineman and defensive lineman, the junior. We talked about him on the Frank's Finest show on the offensive line too. This kid, high motor kid, does a really good job finishing, Marcy. You talked about, you always see him just laying on a dude after a play. He had a bunch of pancakes. This kid was a good football player. He's going to be important. I'm a tall guy at 5'10", but a nice wide lower base. I'm interested to see his jump in his junior year as well. And another kid, defensive end and offensive lineman, Andrew Reichelt. This kid, the junior, high motor. Yeah, I think he really wins with his start on the defensive side and his athleticism to get around the edge. He made plays on both rushing the passer and stopping the run. And on the offensive line, he's an athletic offensive lineman. He uses that athleticism on the offensive side of the ball, and it's going to be an important key. I mean, I mentioned, 3 of these offensive linemen are Frank's finest on one side or the other of the ball. So they're going to be important for this team. Another offensive lineman to keep in mind, Dean Richmond, the senior, right? He plays the offensive guard spot. So they can win up front, right? They can win the battle up front. Question is going to be everywhere else. And it starts at the quarterback spot because I mentioned they have a running back, they have an offensive lineman. Who's going to play the quarterback spot, Mars? And a name to keep in mind, Michael Annunziata. He started in the regional game when the normal starting quarterback was missed the game in the regional game in 2019. He stepped in. He's going to be, there's going to be a quarterback battle. He has a good chance of winning that battle. I'm interested to see what he does with that opportunity, how he takes the reins. He's a young guy as a sophomore, Mars, like I mentioned. He's going to be a young guy taking the reins. So I'm interested to see that. Another kid, running back and defensive back, Sean Rocco Barek. This kid at 5'9", he has a really good nose for the football on defense, and I'm interested to see if he could play, contribute on both sides of the ball. This kid, another young guy, sophomore. Another kid to keep in mind, Jonathan Sasso at the linebacker spot. I think they're going to be pretty solid on the back end, up front, front 7, excuse me. I'm interested to see how the back end comes together, but he's going to be an important guy. You need to have a guy who's going to make a lot of plays for them. They have a guy like Rob Seifer. Is there going to be a guy next to him, a guy like Sasso? That would be a nice little setup with the defensive line and those 2 linebackers. That would be a pretty good group. Another guy to keep in mind, Mars, Jaden Gerald, the last one, wide receiver, defensive back, senior kid. I mentioned a lot of young guys, but those seniors are going to have to step up. Guys like Seifer, guys like Richmond, guys like Sasso, guys like Gerald. Senior guys are going to have to really carry this load until the young guys get going. And Michael Myers, he's a captain. You can kind of classify him as a senior too, but he is a junior. So these are senior guys that are going to have to make plays. And there's quite a few underclassmen, Mars, but I think they have solid experience, and there's going to be another competitive, annual D showdown, and they're going to be playing a C team. So this is going to be interesting with Tuckahoe. Let's go to the other D team, Mars, Haldane. And Coach Ryan McConville, he's been there, I believe, since 2014. In 2019, they went 3-6. They lost to Tucko in the championship. It was a bit of a tough season for them. They were a really young team, and I think they're going to have some youth this year as well. 2019 was their fewest wins since 2015, but they've been pretty consistent. They're 16-10 over the last 3 years, Mars. In 2018, they went 7-2. Haldane has done a pretty good job in recent years. And boy, they're going to bring back a bunch of players. When I spoke to Coach Mars offensively, they're expecting about 10 or 11 starters back from offense last year. Their quarterback they're expecting back. On the offensive line, all 5 offensive linemen they're expecting back. Defensively, same thing. About 10 of the 11 starters. The question is going to be on the defensive line, but they're bringing back a lot of familiar faces. And when I spoke to Coach about the offense, they run a pro offense. They like to be in the pistol. They like to run 11 personnel. They do want to open it up a little bit more, so that's something to keep in mind. Defensively, like I mentioned, they were young last year, and they're getting more comfortable in this scheme, but they got to do a better job of getting off blocks and making tackles, right? Coach talked about those are 2 key issues that they need to do a better job of from last year. And when I spoke to goals and kind of where Coach wanted to go with, he talked about, their motto this year was what they call CAL, C-A-L, and that's character, academics, and leadership. Right, so that's kind of the model that they want to establish for the program is to reach Cal, which is high character, high academics, high leadership in the program, and they want to build this program to a consistent championship team, and not just on the football field. But I really like when I saw this: build champions of life through football. So football, we love football. Football has made us who we are today. It's helped make us who we are today. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be an interesting line because football really does that. Football shapes young men, and if young women play, young women. Football is a great sport. All sports are great, but we have a little bias to football, and I think football is an important aspect of people's lives that help mold them to who they are. But when I talk about the players, we got to talk about the Santos, right? So let's talk about one of them, quarterback and safety, Daniel Santos. This kid is a dual threat quarterback. Can hurt you throwing the ball, hurt you running the ball. He really runs like a fullback, right? This guy is a multi-sport athlete. He was our Frank's finest at the safety spot. Going to be he was kind of a man amongst boys running the ball at the quarterback spot last year. And at the safety spot, he's kind of like an additional linebacker. He's always around the ball. He makes a bunch of plays. This kid is a very good football player. And he's going to be, again, I don't want to call him a breakout because he's a Frank's finest. I like to keep those to people, not familiar with. But I think he's going to have another really good season. And he's going to be an important piece that every defensive coordinator is looking at to stop. Another kid, Darren Santos, running back and linebacker, Mars. On the running back side, he was a Frank's finest. He runs with nice power and balance. And a guy who runs with that kind of strength, you feel like he might not be versatile, like he just does one job running the ball, but he shows versatility. You can line him out wide. He can catch passes for you. I like this kid a lot. The linebacker side, again, has a good nose for the football. The Santos are going to be 2-way players that are going to be extremely important for this program. But some of the other guys to keep in mind. Offensive lineman and defensive lineman, Will Etta. Big body kid. He's got to be the anchor up front. We talked about the offensive line. He's going to have to be important for them, the junior. Another offensive lineman and linebacker, Mars, Christian Pizzulo, the senior. Another important 2-way guy. We're going to see. Can they control up front? Because they're bringing all 5 offensive linemen back. We talked about Tucko bringing back 4 of the 5. It's going to be an interesting battle up front between these 2 teams. I'm interested to see how those lines come together. A couple weapons, Mars, wide receiver and defensive back, Ryan Irwin. I think he's a really important weapon for them on the offensive side of the ball. He's going to be an important target for them. Wide receiver and strong safety, Soren Hombo, the junior, 6'2", good-sized kid, 165 pounds, and a nice target. I think he's going to be an X factor for this team because I think this kid has some potential to make some big plays for this team. Salil Gaines, another junior kid, Jesse Osterfeld, junior wide receiver, and then this young sophomore, Jesse Hagan, tight end. I mentioned a bunch of these kids. Who is going to be that other player outside of the Santoses that can make plays for this program? That's what I'm interested to see. Who's going to step up? Who's going to make these plays? Another kid on the defensive side of the ball, outside linebacker and tight end, Doug Donaghy, the senior. This kid had a pretty good nose for the football, and they're going to need, like I mentioned, another guy outside of the Santos who's going to make plays on both sides of the ball. I'm thinking Doug on the defensive side, what can he do? I think these guys have the skill guys. They're going to have guys in the secondary and linebacker, but to me, they're bringing back all these defensive linemen, offensive linemen. do they become the strength of the team? Because if they can, I think this is going to make Haldane a very dangerous football team because they had the returning skill guys. Can the offensive line, defensive line come together? That's going to be the question marks.
Yeah, I'm going to focus in on Tuckahoe, right? And the reason why I'm going to key on Tuckahoe is because the offensive line returning, almost all of them coming back, is a really important thing to have on the team. Now, granted, they're losing out a lot of their skill players, right? I mean, that's going to be the big thing that I notice. Well, I'm going to watch as the season progresses because obviously stepping up as a young player is going to be a big deal, right? And obviously, as skill players, you have to learn of all the different plays you're going to have to be running, different steps you're going to have to take. But in my opinion, I feel like having a returning offensive line makes life a little easier because if they have that connection, that synergy together to allow a lot of these holes to open up, especially when you have some really breakout guys like Rob Cipher, Nicholas Santucci as being kind of the key cogs on the offensive line, it's going to help, right? I mean, I raved about Santucci on our Frank's Finest videos. Because the guy's got this motor that literally wants to put you in the dirt every time. And I think that when you have guys like that to win the trenches, it's going to make life easier for your young, skilled players. And the X factor is really going to be the quarterback position. Yeah. It's going to be really difficult to kind of have a young quarterback come in and really push forward on a season, really condensed, condensed off season, a shortened season in general. But I think that this offense is going to be riding on the offensive line,
running back Michael Myers.
And obviously Michael Myers. I mean, who could you? How could you not mention Michael Myers here? But he is a really impressive young talent. Being a junior and being a leader on this team is impressive. Being what considered a captain as a young guy, it's difficult to do. But having him and the offensive line is really going to help the offense grow. When the other skill positions of young guys are going to kind of mix and match, and you'll see how well this offense really goes going forward.
Absolutely, it's going to be very interesting. And let's move now to the independent league. It was almost like we got a ring for the independent league. And I mentioned there's two different leagues. We're going to go through all the teams, but I'm going to start with Edgemont. Okay, and coached by Coach Brendan Connolly. In 2019, they went 8-1. They defeated the Briarcliff Hamilton football program in the Independent League Championship. 2019 was their most wins since 2005, Mars, when they had 8 wins. 3 straight years of over 500 football for the first time since 06 to 08. So, Edgemont has really put this together and done a really good job. And they're going to return some skill guys. Guys on both the skill and the front. Offensive-wise, 6 of the 11 starters coming back. They're bringing back their quarterback. On the offensive line, 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. And defensively, 6 of the 11 starters coming back. We didn't get to speak to Coach, but the players, it has to start with probably one of the best athletes in the independent league, and that's Kirk Giulianardo, the quarterback and defensive back. He was our Frank's Finest both ways at the quarterback spot and safety spot. He's one of the best two-way players. I mean, let's just call it. He's got good speed. He's got good athleticism. Offensively, he's not going to throw it 50 times to beat you, but he is such a threat to run the ball. It really opens up the passing game for them. He can hurt you at any moment. Defensively, I think he's rangy. He can make plays in the run game. He does a good job attacking the football. This kid is a really good football player. But another really impressive kid, especially on the offensive side, running back and strong safety, Jake Rosenmars. He was our Frank's Finest at the running back spot. I think he's an underrated running back. Not underrated to us because he's a Frank's Finest, but I think underrated overall. He's not talked about that much, but he's a downhill running back who has a nice shiftiness to him and a powerful stiff arm. This kid at 6 foot, 195 pounds. He can be a bell cow if they want him to, but that tandem of Kirk and Jake running the ball is really tough on a team, and I'm expecting the same thing this year. But let's talk about another guy, Dexter Seeley, defensive end and offensive lineman, and senior Frank's Finest on the defensive side of the ball, going to be an important two-way guy to anchor both sides of the line. He's a really disruptive edge guy on defense. I think he has a nice mix of strength and speed, high motor kid, made a bunch of plays, and he's going to be really important to them. Another kid, offensive lineman and linebacker, Owen Burnside, Mars, a senior, 5'11", 180 pounds. He's an athletic guard. He moves his feet well, has a little bit of nastiness to him, can block at the second level. He's going to be another important guy. Another important guy on the offensive line. We talked about 3 of the 5 come back. Owen Fairbarn, the senior. So, can they have the weapons, right? 2 of the big-time weapons, 2 of the best weapons in the independent league. Can they hold up front? Can the offensive line put it together? like they did last year and produce holes for this team because that'll create a lot of pressure. But a guy on the outside, wide receiver linebacker, Anthony DeRosa, a senior, there's going to be an important guy in the passing game and at the linebacker spot. And a couple other offensive linemen to keep in mind. We have Mr. Nunez, the junior, at 5'11", 190 pounds. Nate Parsons, the sophomore, 6'1", 240 pounds. A young football player at 6'1", 240. I'm interested to see how they fill in the rest of the offensive line. Are some of the names to keep in mind? Is there going to be someone we didn't mention that steps up? The offensive line is definitely going to be intriguing to me. But another kid I want to call the X factor of this team, Mars, and I think he's wide receiver, quarterback, and defensive back, Milan Giulianardo. Okay, he's a sophomore. And if he's anything like the other Kirk Giulianardo, then that's going to be another really important weapon. And I'm interested to see. This kid was a freshman on the team last year. He's going into his sophomore year. I'm interested to see the jump. This kid, solid size kid at 6 feet for a sophomore. He could be an added weapon. And if they can get another guy outside of Kirk and Jake, that can really change things. And that's why I'm going to call him my X factor. I think they're going to have top-tier players. They have top-tier players. It's the depth on this team. That's what I'm wondering about Edgemont. Mars, let's move to the next team, the team they played in the championship, the Briarcliff Hamilton football program, coached by Skip Stevens. In 2019, they went 7-2. I mentioned they lost to Edgemont in the championship. 2019 was the most wins they've had, this program, in over the last 16 years. All right, so really good season by them. They're looking for their first back-to-back over 500. They had their back-to-back over 500 season, for the first time in 16 years as well. So this has been a program that has really built things the right way. And they're going to bring back a bunch of talent. Offensive-wise, Mars, 8 of the 11 starters coming back. They do have to replace their quarterback, which is going to be important because he had a really good year. Offensive line-wise, 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. The coach thinks they have a veteran offensive line that is going to be their strength. Defensively, about 8 of the 11 starters coming back. Didn't get to speak to Coach Stevens specifically about the team, but a couple guys to keep in mind. Let's start up front, Mars. Mizell Davis, offensive lineman and defensive lineman. Frank's finest, thick body kid, love his versatility. Lined up in multiple spots on the offensive line. He's going to be an important player, and I think he's a pretty darn good football player. Another offensive lineman, defensive lineman, Connor Gualtieri, the senior. And a big kid, going to be an important key on both sides of the front. Again, I think offensive line-wise is what's going to distinguish this team. And another guy, Owen Healy, offensive lineman. Not the tallest guy, not the biggest guy, 5'8", 175 pounds, but a scrappy offensive lineman. These 3 guys are going to be important names to figure, and then how they fill in the rest is going to be big. But offensive line distinguishes themselves. Let's not change what another big-time strength that they have, and that is at the skill position. Let's talk about wide receiver and defensive back. Jalen Savage, the junior basketball player. I think he's the most explosive player on the team. He's a guy who can beat you deep. He can burn you. If he catches short patterns, he's not easy to tackle in open field, but he has nice hands, good body control, and can hurt you on deep patterns. Defensive back-wise, again, really good athlete. He has the tools to be a good man-to-man guy, good zone guy. This guy's an impressive football player. I'm interested to see his junior season. Another guy who I really like, wide receiver and defensive back Jackson Morrow. He's a Frank's finest at the wide receiver spot, Mars. Really good hands, really good body control. He makes some serious difficult catches, contested catches. But I also think, he's not going to blow you away with his speed, but he wins with route running. He does a really good job of running crisp routes, hurting defenders with their leverage. He does a good job. I think he's a really good possession receiver. He made some big-time plays for them. And kind of their most versatile player, and I'll go into Brandon Rispoli, the junior, Mars, running back and defensive back. He's a kid who can line up in the backfield and run the ball. He could be the lead back of his team. We're going to find out. But he can also line up in the slot and run a bunch of patterns and make a bunch of plays for you, both in the run game and pass game. He's going to be huge. Another kid to keep in mind, running back and linebacker, Kyle Proctor, the senior. I mentioned about who's going to be the lead back. You're going to see some definitely Brandon. Can Kyle be another guy who can, contribute in the running game? And at the linebacker spot, you're going to need somebody who has a nose for the football. So that's going to be really important. And then the biggest question mark is quarterback. They return a bunch of guys from both the offensive line and skill guys. A guy like Mark Milano, the senior, is he the next guy up? Is he the guy who's going to take the reins? I can call him the X Factor. We probably call a bunch of quarterbacks the X Factor because he's got the guys around him. Like, is someone going to take the reins and be the big-time quarterback to lead this offense And that's going to be the biggest question for this team, in my opinion, because I think this is one of the most talented teams in the independent league.
Yeah, I'm going to focus in on Edgemont. I really like this team. I mean, they're very talented. They have a lot of top tier talent all across the board. I mean, on both the offensive line and in the skill position. And it's really riding high on Kirk Gia Leonardo. And I really think that he is just a stellar athlete, two-way player, and one of the top athletes in all of the independent league.
Yes.
And I really think that they're going to be focusing on these top tier talent. But the question is going to be whether they have the depth to go a full season. Now, granted, it's a shortened season compared to what we normally see in all football sport, whether it's Section 1 or independent.
Yep.
So that might be beneficial to a team that might not have as much depth as they normally would have. But I really think that that's going to be the driving force, whether or not they will, if anything, injuries happen or anything like that occurs. And riding on these top tier either veteran players or returning players are really going to be important. But development of the young guys and filling in the rest of the spots is going to be crucial. I mean, I think that when you're relying too much on young talent, it means that you'll probably progress as the season goes on. But when you look at Edgemont, they have a lot of senior presence on this team, and I think that that's going to benefit them, especially in the beginning of the season. And by the time that the young guys get that experience, it could be in full swing, by that point. So I really think that Edgemont has a lot of that the cogs in place. It's really just now putting in the rest of the shining it up. Making sure the machine works well, and I think that it'll be a very interesting season for them.
Absolutely. Let's move to the next team, Mars. Let's go to Irvington, coached by Steve Urich. He's been there since 2016. In 2019, Mars, they went 5-4. They defeated Rhinebeck in the third-place game in the Independent League. In 2019 is a really good step for the program. 2019 was the first time they were over 500 since 2016. They're looking for their back-to-back over 500 record for the first time since 2013, 2014. So I think that would be the next step. And they're going to return some good players. Offensively, 6 of the 11 starters are expected back. Quarterback, they do need to replace. But on the offensive line, 3 out of the 5 guys. They're definitely going to have to replace their quarterback, Daly, who had a very good year, and one of their running backs, Brennan. So it's going to be interesting. On the defensive side of the ball, 6 of the 11 starters are expected back. They lost a couple secondary guys. Big question to me is Max Forte, their safety. Is he going to be playing this year? Because I thought he made some nice plays for them, and he's a smart football player. So that's going to be the big question for me on that back end on defense. When I spoke to Coach, offensively, they know they have a really good running back, and we'll get into him. But he wants to be balanced. He wants to reduce penalties. They had way too many penalties on offense last year. That was a big emphasis for Coach. And defensively, they played a lot of man. They moved away a little bit from zone, and in a passing league like the independent league is, that could make or break, right? If you're not a good man-to-man team, they can hit a lot of plays on you. So Coach definitely spoke about kind of mixing it up a little bit more. But he really likes his linebacker core. And when I get into the players' linebacker core is going to be definitely a strength for them. The goal when I spoke to Coach, he wants to continue the success from last year. He wants to get to that back-to-back over 500 record, which would be a nice step for the program. And it's going to be interesting if they can. Question's going to be on the offensive line depth because they've returned 3 of the 5 starters, Mars. Their first 5 might be okay. Like they might have a solid first 5, but depth after that is going to be the big question for this team, and it's going to be a question for a lot of teams. And I think it's a good point that Coach made. But going into the kids, Mars, let's start with running back and linebacker Trevin Anacarico, the senior. This kid is he was a Frank's finest at the running back spot. I think he's got solid lateral movement, lateral quickness. He's a one cut and go back, right? So he doesn't like to, mess around. He wants to make one cut, attack downhill, and he does a pretty darn good job of that. He has solid vision, and he has deceptive speed. He's not 40 speed, but in games you see him pull away from people. This kid is a solid all-around football player, and he's going to be the lead back for this team, and I think he's going to have a good season. Another guy to keep in mind, offensive tackle and linebacker Justin Kim. He had a really strong year last year. Mars 5'11", 215 pounds. As the offensive tackle spot, which he was a Frank's finest, I think he's an athletic tackle. He showed good strength and down block. He can block at the second level. He's got some nastiness to him. And on the linebacker spot, he'll really smack you. I mean, this guy will line you up and smack you, and he's going to be an important cog, two-way player. When we talk about offensive line and linebackers being a strength, he's going to have another really good year. Another kid to keep in mind, defensive end and offensive tackle, Jacob Stein, the senior. This kid plays multiple spots on the defensive side of the ball. A really solid pass rusher. He wins with his explosiveness and with his hands. He's actually one of the better defensive linemen at using his hands to get off blocks. But he made plays as a pass rusher, stopping the run. He could definitely get a little stronger. But this kid also has a nastiness to him on the offensive side of the ball. He's trying to knock your head off. And he made some really nice plays on the offensive side of the ball as well. So those first three I mentioned are going to be key cogs for them. A couple other guys to keep in mind, and to me, it's the quarterback battle that's intriguing to me. Tommy Flanagan, the junior, he was the backup quarterback last year. He's competing for the quarterback spot. And another guy, Josh Aronson, the senior. These are the two guys going at it for the quarterback spot. So I'm interested to see who comes out on top for Irvington and who becomes the quarterback to replace Daly from last year. But I can't end this team without talking about the kicker, Mars, our Frank's finest, Morgan Balkin, the sophomore. He's going to be doing kickoff, punts, field goals. Coach talked about he has a 50-yard leg, Mars, so this is definitely going to be a weapon in the special teams department for this team. And special teams is an unspoken. Everyone talk offense, defense. Special teams is going to be huge this season, and to have a kicker as a weapon is going to be big. Let's talk to about another team, Mars. Let's go to Hastings, coached by Sammy O'Hare. This is his first year as the head coach. 2019, they went 2-6, but they're going to bring back some talent. Starters-wise, offensively, they're expecting 7 of the 11 starters back. They do have to replace their quarterback on the offensive line. 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen coming back. Defensively, 8 of the 11 starters coming back. So they're bringing back some guys. When I spoke to Coach offensively, they want to improve their consistency. They want to improve their speed and tempo. The question is going to be quarterback, right? Who wins the quarterback job? Defensively, continuity and consistency. That's what Coach spoke about. And they definitely want to improve their intensity and the ability, their tackling ability. And this is going to be important for all teams with the shortened practices and, a lot to get in. Tackling is going to be teams that are good tackling teams on defense are probably going to be one of the better defenses, those who can tackle well. And that's going to be an important point for the Hastings football program that Coach talked about. And the goal for him and for this program is to grow Hastings, grow the program. They want to get kids physically and mentally prepped for this season. They want Hastings to be a program to be reckoned with, and that's what Coach kind of reiterated to me. And when you look at the players, Mars, it's got to start with one of my favorite players, wide receiver and defensive back, Chris Rattiorti, the senior, consistent two-way guy. Offensively, he's a really reliable target for them. He's going to be one of the top targets on offense for this team, and it's because he's well balanced. He's got solid speed, good body control, good hands. He made some really difficult catches last year. He's definitely going to be one of their more reliable targets. On the defensive side of the ball, he likes to play off coverage where he can read the routes in front of him, break on the ball. He does a good job. He's a good basketball player, attacking the ball in the air and stuff like that. So he's going to be an important two-way player for them. Another guy, running back and linebacker, Matt Moore, the senior, 6'1", 200 pounds, well-built kid. Right at the linebacker spot, I really like his range. He's a bit of a penetrator. I like to send him up the middle, but he does a decent job finishing. But I really like his tenacity to get to the football. He does a good job with that. Offensive side of the ball, is he going to be downhill running back for them? Can he be a bell cow? To me, the X factor of this team is Chris Capuano, wide receiver and outside linebacker. This kid 5'11", 165 pounds. I thought he was a really active guy in coverage. He played some good job playing some man. He was active in the run game. On the offensive side of the ball, he's going to be another weapon outside Chris. And he made some plays. He made some plays on both sides of the ball. To me, if he can grow, he can continue, if he can improve on last year, he'll be a big X factor for this team. To me, who the breakout player is going to be, it's going to be running back and outside linebacker / edge player, Kyle Honecker. And this kid, 5'8", 170 pounds, right? Not tall, 170 pounds, solid size kid. I call him the most disruptive because I'm not sure if they're going to move him to another spot. He was their most disruptive defensive lineman last year. I mean, this kid uses his speed really well. He made a bunch of plays on the defensive side of the ball, and I really like the makeup of this guy. I think, he was a really solid, just a really solid penetrator. He caused a lot of issues for offenses when he was playing, and I'm interested to see him. I think this kid could thrive depending on where they move him. But if he has any type of season that he did last time and he grows at it all, I think he's going to have a really good season, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Let's talk about a couple linemen, Mars. Offensive lineman Colin McSpedden. Is he going to be that anchor, the senior? Another kid, guard and defensive lineman Johnny Amaral, the senior, 5'11", 190 pounds, guard, athletic offensive lineman. We're going to see the offensive line is going to be big, and those are two names to keep in mind. But let's talk about quarterback, right? Who are they going to find to replace last year's graduate quarterback? Robert Kennedy is someone to keep in mind. The sophomore coach says he has a lot of promise. He's liked the way that he's attacked the offseason so far. I'm interested to see how he does at practice. Does he win the job? I think Hastings will be an improved football team, Mars. I think they have bringing back a bunch of guys. If they could stay healthy, they could be a surprise team.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on Irvington. And I think Irvington has, when you look at their returning players, 6 out of the 11 on offense, 6 out of the 11 on defense. Offensive line returning 3 out of the 5. I mean, that's a pretty good thing to see. Unfortunately, you're not going to have a returning quarterback, which means you're going to have that quarterback competition, which I think was the first thing I'm going to mention is that's really going to be the X factor. And I feel like we've been saying X factor quarterback this whole time, but reality, that's what it is. Yeah. I mean, you have to see who is the quarterback and whether or not they're going to be progressing forward, especially if it's a young guy. I mean, the two guys you mentioned, a junior and a senior, they're going to be competing to see, who's the best quarterback at this position. And I think that's going to be what's going to drive this offense forward. But you definitely have some key cogs here, like Trevor Anacorico is definitely a great back to have on this offense. I mean, he's, like you said before, he's a one cut and go, and he's a very aggressive runner. And I like the way he plays. He's very good lateral quickness. But then you look at some of these other guys, other key cogs here. Justin Kim, right, another offensive linebacker. Jacob Stein, defensive end, offensive tackle. I mean, these guys are going to be focusing quite a lot on. I mean, you're going to key in on these types of leaders to kind of push your team going forward because you need that veteran presence in a very condensed season like this. But, I mean, there's a lot of other guys, but how could you not mention Morgan Balkan? Right? How could
kicker, man?
Come on,
we love our kickers.
He's your special teams, guru right now. He's like he's your magician. You need those extra points, you need those kicks. He's going to give it to you, and he's a sophomore, right? That's the big thing I noticed. But when I'm analyzing this team, you have some key returning players for sure, but you definitely have a lot of things you have to fill in, right? And that's going to be the big question: who they fill them in with, and how well did those remaining starters play? And that's going to be what's going to be driving everything going forward. And it'll be very interesting to see. And I'm looking forward to see this 50-yard boot that we've been hearing about.
Ready to see this leg.
Yeah, man.
Let's move to the final two teams of the first independent league, and then we'll go to the second independent league. Let's go to Croton Harmon, Mars, by Coach Ryan Callahan. 2019, they went 1-7. They're trying to rebound this year. 2019 was their lowest win total since 2016. But good news, they're bringing back a bunch of players. Offensively, 9 of the 11 starters are projected back. They have to replace their quarterback, obviously, but offensive line-wise, 4 to the 5 offensive linemen coming back. And the quarterback, they have 3 kids competing. So it's going to be a nice competition at the quarterback spot. Defensively, 6 of the 11 starters coming back, but they are bringing back a couple rotation guys that played last year. When I spoke to Coach, offensively, they want to be more balanced. Definitely want more consistency in the run game. They had way too many turnovers on the offense, which definitely turnovers are not a good thing. They change games, and you really lose a bunch of games with to be a turnover. Defensively, he wants to be more aggressive. He wants to be, again, another coach reiterating tackling. They got to be a better tackling team. And usually the best defenses are better tacklers, right? It's not just, the best scheme or the best way that they rally to the ball. Those are important aspects. But you got to be able to tackle. You got to be able to solo tackle. You got to be able to gang tackle. Tackling is a key part of defense. The goals, Coach mentioned, they want to finish over 500. He likes the way the kids have put in the work via Zoom, via the workouts. He loves the participation in the program right now. He wants to see that translate into wins, and they want to finish over 500, which I think is a nice goal to have. A bunch of players, they talk about it coming back. To me, it starts offensive lineman, defensive lineman Dan Vera, who's a Frank's finest on the defensive side of the ball. This kid at 5'10", 220 pounds. He's really a stump on the defensive tackle. Hard to move, made some nice plays. But he's going to be an important two-way player. But I think probably the breakout player for this team is going to be one of the kids competing at the quarterback spot. He played wide receiver. Lorenzo Leda, the senior, most explosive player on offense. This kid's 6'2", 160 pounds. He's going to be an important weapon, whether he wins the quarterback job or he stays at wide receiver. I think this kid is a breakout player. Another kid to keep in mind, tight end and linebacker, Forrest Reese, the senior, 6 foot, 190 pounds. Again, Important two-way players. You got to make plays at the linebacker spot, at the tight end spot. A couple other weapons, Mars. Ryan Lavelle, the senior. This kid, 5'10". Jackson Carney, running back and defensive back, the sophomore at 5'11". And wide receiver and defensive back, Tyler Marcus. So these are definitely names to keep in mind. Weapons around whoever wins the quarterback spot and going to be important players on the back end on defense. So these are going to see two-way players that names to keep in mind. But let's move to the offensive line and defensive line because that's going to be just as important. We mentioned 4 of the 5 guys coming back. And to me, the X factor, Jonathan Fenger, the senior. Okay, offensive lineman, defensive lineman. This kid is 6'4", 270 pounds, Mars. A man that size in the independent league could be a dominant force. And so I'm interested to see his growth from junior to senior year because if he can put it together, if he can bring the tenacity, bring the technique, this kid could be an anchor on both sides of the ball. He has really good size. So I'm definitely interested to see that. A couple other guys, Robert Smith, Colin Cooney, the junior, Gabe Camilleri, the sophomore at 6 feet, 107 pounds. Let's see this offensive line coming together. That's who I want to see. I want to see how this offensive line, the synergy together, who's going to be the big anchor on this team. And finally, to wrap it all off, Mars, Carter Schmidt, the freshman tight end and fullback. And again, when you talk about these smaller programs, you're talking about young football players participating multiple years on a varsity. These are the type of names that I'm definitely interested to see as the season gets into full swing this week. I think that this is another team that could be a surprise in the independent league, bringing back a bunch of players. It's just the work that they put in. Are they going to continue that work? Is it going to translate into wins? This is a team that has a bunch of players coming back, so I'm interested to see how the coaching staff and the players pull it together. Finally, Mars, to wrap it all up in the first independent part, let's go to Albertus Magnus, coached by Brett Cotter. 29, Coach Cotter was an assistant last year. He's a first-year head coach this year, first year head coaching this team. 2019, they went 0-7. Obviously, it was a tough year. They're trying to rebound, rebuild the program. 2019 was their worst season total over the last 16 years. But they're trying to build it back up, trying to rebound it. And the players bringing back offensively, they're bringing back 5 of the 11 starters. They're bringing back the quarterback. But the big question, offensive line, none of the 5 starters are expected back from last year, which is going to create a lot of opportunity. Defensively, 4 of the 11 starters. I think Coach mentioned that they feel they're going to be strong at the linebackers defensive back spot, but up front is going to be the big question. When I spoke to Coach, offensive, defensively, they want to be more tenacious. They want to bring more desire, more pretty much accountability on both sides of the ball. They want to be aggressive, and that's kind of where he wants to bring that whatever they have offensively, they want to bring to the defensive side of the ball. So tenacious, aggressive, these are things to definitely keep in mind. And, the goal, he wants the team to come together. He wants them to fight through adversity, never give up, never let go of the rope is what we, used to call it. And that's going to be an important trend that he wants to set a baseline for this program, the foundation. But he did want to give a shout out to the assistants on this team who have done a really good job of prepping this team and helping build that foundation, right? Talked with the assistant head coach, Kelvin Smith, defensive back coach, Kevin Adams, offensive lineman and defensive lineman, Coach Rogers, Coach Bailu, and I know I'm going to butcher the other coach's name, Coach Seth Gekos, and then linebacker Coach Menard. So, again, I apologize if I butcher any names, but Coach raved about his assistant coaches, and he talked about how they've done a really good job of trying to lay the foundation of this program to rebound back to what Albertus Magnus wants to go to. And when we talk about the players, Mars, let's start at the quarterback spot. Chris Calvario, the senior, this kid at 5'11", 160 pounds. I think he's a really solid, underrated quarterback. He showed some really nice accuracy and some touch. He also has some decent mobility. I think when he's decisive, when he knows where he wants to go to the ball, he's done a really good job of placing the ball where only his receiver had a chance at it. And I'm interested to see him going into the senior year. A couple of other guys, linebacker, running back, Cody Johnson. He was a Frank's finest at the linebacker spot. Tough, active defender. He does a really good job of finishing. He can come off the edge. Really makes some nice plays in open space. And he's going to have to be an important two-way guy. Another guy, running back and linebacker, Dylan DiChiaro, 5'11", 193 pounds. I think he's a really good blocking back, but can he carry the load? Can he be the lead back? Defense side of the ball, he wants to line you up. He wants to knock you out. This kid is a thumper. Another kid to keep in mind, running back and wide receiver and defensive back, Jojo Francimano, the senior. This kid at 5'9", 145 pounds. I think he's going to be the breakout player. He's a weapon. This kid can run the ball on the outside. He can catch passes for you. I think he's a solid route runner. This kid, I believe, could be the breakout player for this team and be the top weapon for Chris Calvario. Another kid to keep in mind, wide receiver, quarterback, and defensive back, Logan Maher. Another weapon. Let's see, getting versatile athletes around a solid quarterback with those two running backs and Cody Johnson and Dillon. They could have some weapons. But the question is going to be, we talked about this, Mars, offensive line. Right? One of the offensive linemen, Colin Harrington, basketball kid, he did play some last year at 6'3", 215 pounds. I thought he had really solid feet. Question is he going to play? That's going to be, but if he does, that will be a big boost to that offensive line. A couple other guys, Johnny Bricker, the junior, offensive lineman, defensive lineman, hungry kid, hard-working kid. He's a name that could win one of those spots on that offensive line. And finally, on the offensive line, Connor Gene Lewis, the junior, 5'10", 200 pounds. These are kids who are working hard. They're going to have a lot of opportunity. Right? All the slates are open. It's time to take it. These are some of the names. But a couple other guys, and I'll give you one of my X factors, Mars, at the outside linebacker running back spot. Justin Edelman at 5'11", 185 pounds. Solid size kid. I thought he was really active as an outside linebacker. Made a bunch of plays for the team. This guy could be an important cog on defense. He's someone who definitely keep in mind and see if he can play both ways. And to wrap it all up, let's go wide receiver and cornerback. Mike LaRusso, the sophomore, young football player. They're going to have a bunch of young guys they're going to have to rely on outside of these seniors to fill in these spots. I think they'll be strong at linebacker and DB and and at the weapons along with the quarterback. Question's going to be up front. And we talked about this with a bunch of teams. Up front is going to be huge, and on the offensive defensive line for Albertus Magnus is the biggest question.
Yeah, I'm going to focus on Croton Harmon. I think that having a season that you go 1-7, a lot of people might be looking down on you, but I wouldn't be looking down on Croton Harmon because I think they could be a surprise team this year. And the reason why is because they have so many returning players. I mean, offensively, 9 out of the 11. Yep. Defensively, 6 out of the 11. 4 out of the 5 offensive linemen are coming back. Which, yes. And me, I think that's something that is crucial, especially with the way this year is. You need to have a lot of that synergy, a lot of those kinks worked out. And when you already have 4 out of the 5 guys kind of pegged to say, all right, well, we have that. We're not saying it's guaranteed, but most likely, like when you say these are 4 dudes that played last year that are coming back, there's a good chance they could be starting again. Unless there's another kid that comes in and surprises coach, that could happen. I'm not saying it,
and that's not a bad thing.
No, yeah, that's a good thing for the program. Yeah. But the point is that when you have that core group of linemen already there, it does help your progression as an offense. But on not even just that, you do have some guys, athletes that are competing at quarterback position, which is the big question because they have to replace a quarterback, and that's Lorenzo Letta. Is somebody that's an explosive athlete, and whether he is the quarterback or he's not, he can contribute to this offense in any way, shape, or form. But there's a lot of skill players on this team that I think, as a senior presence, that they're going to rely on pretty heavily. I mean, you mentioned a few of them before. I mean, Forrest Grease, Ryan Lavelle, Jackson Carney. These are guys that are all going to contribute to this offensive scheme, and the offensive line I think is going to be the major X factor for me. I think that if they can play with that synergy intact, with that grit that you need to have and to really win the trenches, no matter who the quarterback is going to have a more easier time taking that spot. And I think that they will be a surprise team this year. They will not go 1-7. Granted,
you're making your prediction.
I'm making a prediction. They will not go 1-7 for sure. I think they will definitely have an improved season in my eyes.
That's great. Let's move now to the other independent league, and let's go to Peekskill, Mars, by Coach Tom Etrie. This is the first year coach for Peekskill. He's coming from Tucko. We had a really successful time at Tucko. 2019, they went 0-6 as another program looking to rebuild. Right, they moved from 1A to the independent. They're looking for more than 2 wins for the first time since 2015. And, they're going to bring back some kids. The big thing from Coach Tom Etrie is that he's bringing back his staff from Tucko. So, he had a real successful time at Tucko. He comes along. He brings a majority of the staff. That's great news for Peekskill to try to rebound this team. If you look on the players coming back offensively, they're hoping 6 of the 11 starters coming back. Do have to replace their quarterback. On the offensive line, 2 out of the 5 coming back. Defensively, similar. 6 of the 11 players coming back. When I spoke to coach on offense, defense, offensively, they're going to be led by their offensive coordinator, Vito DeBellis. They want to be up tempo. They want to be no huddle. They want to play fast. That's going to be the mindset on offense. Defensively, they run that 4-3 defense. They need to be physical up front. That's where they want to set that. They want to be physical. They want to stop the run, force teams into long down situation. The goal, they want to win. And coach talked about winning cures a lot of issues, right? And it's true. Winning does cure. And you want to see hard work result in a win. And that would be big for a program like this. And what coach really, he wants to get the participation in Peekskill football up. They have around 25 to 30 kids now. And, they want to build up the program to where there's high participation. And then, all these schools come from different backgrounds. And, some of these are small schools that just don't have a lot of people enrolled in the schools. Some of them are bigger schools that trying to rebuild up their program. So like the independent league, there's still good football to be played and good coaching, right? It's just teams coming from different backgrounds. And that's where Peekskill is right now. But if you look at some of the players, it starts wide receiver and defensive back, Jay Tinsley, the senior. This kid about 6 feet 6'1". I think he's an athletic freak. He was a Frank's finest defensive back. He had all the tools to be a good man-to-man or zone defensive back. So I'm interested to see him. He's going to be a weapon on both sides of the ball. Really interesting tools. But a guy on the offensive lineman and defensive lineman who I think will be the breakout player for this team, Mars, Elijah Williams, the junior. This kid's at about 6'1", 6'2", 270 pounds. He's going to play the left tackle or right tackle. I think this kid is an anchor. This kid is a hard-working kid. You see him in the workout videos. He's putting in the work. I think this kid could be a real force on both fronts, especially on the offensive line for this team. Another kid to keep in mind at the quarterback spot, Mars, Elijah Ritters, the senior. He's an X-factor player for me. Didn't play last year, but an intriguing athlete. They want to run that high up-tempo offense. Another kid, wide receiver and defensive back, Jaden Salazar, the junior. I thought he did a decent job in the secondary last year, whether it be in good position or bad position. Another kid, linebacker and fullback, Zoar Ruff, the senior, 5'11", 220 pounds, strong, thick lower body kid, but he was pretty versatile. He kind of dropped into coverage, played the run. He definitely has to improve on reading offenses and attacking upfield, attacking the line of scrimmage. But this kid made some plays, and I'm interested. He could be an important two-way player for them. And finally, offensive lineman Kendall Cousins, the senior. Those are some of the names to keep in mind. Peekskill is going to be interesting, definitely. Let's move to another team, Mars Poughkeepsie. Coach Mark Bianco. This is the first season coaching Poughkeepsie. In 2019, they went 0-6. This is another program trying to find its footing, trying to find its identity, and really trying to find stability. Now, we didn't get to speak to coach, but a couple guys to keep in mind. Outside linebacker and wide receiver, Will Reddix. He was our Frank's finest. I like this kid. 6'3", 200 pounds, raw kid, but showed good athleticism. Come off the edge. He can drop into coverage. This was an impressive kid. A couple other guys, wide receiver and safety, Shelvon Grant, the senior, quarterback and linebacker, Tyson Dixon, linebacker Jameer Joyce, and then a couple linemen, offensive linemen and defensive linemen, Joey Nejwad and Nate Brenmore. So, you don't have a lot of intel on these teams, but these are some of the kids that are going to have to play key roles. Let's move down to another team, Mars. Let's go Ramapo, coached by Kevin Bullock. He's been there since 2016 and 2019. And again, 1-8. This is trying to build up a culture, trying to build a foundation. Coach spoke about it. Starters coming back, 5 of the 11 starters. They have to replace their quarterback, but the offensive line, 4 of the 5 guys coming back. So a lot of skill guys are replaced, but it's good to have the offensive line coming back. Defensively, 5 of the 11 guys coming back, but they may have to depend on 1 or 2 freshmen to be key parts of this team. And when I spoke to coach, offensively, they want to do a better job maintaining drives, running the ball. And defensively, they run that 4-2-5. They want to get back to basics. The defense, they definitely have a lot to improve on. They want to be more sound in covering, tackling, and just being in the right spot, right? Making the correct reads. And he thinks their defensive coordinator, Brian Saunders, does a good job with the defense, and that they're going to get him right on track. But the goal, he mentioned it, bring stability back to the program, bring the foundation that can float. He mentioned a boat reference, float on water and not sink. And it's an important one. Again, I think Ramapo is an intriguing team, And it starts, to me, with one of my favorite players in the independent league, linebacker and running back, Jamil Jellicoeur, the senior. This kid's 6'1", 180 pounds. Frank's finest linebacker, rangy kid. When he is decisive, he's one of the best at attacking the line of scrimmage. Another kid to keep in mind, the X factor for this team, wide receiver and defensive back, Xavier Gaines, the junior. This kid's a slot wide receiver. Didn't have a lot of opportunities, but he had 4 touchdowns last year. I think the growth from his sophomore to junior year is going to be a big one, and he's going to be an important player. Another kid at the quarterback spot who they're trying to, move in for an important role. Richie Lewis hurt his ACL his sophomore year, didn't play last year, but a really good athlete. And he could step in at the quarterback spot. He might surprise some people, and that's someone to keep in mind. Running back and outside linebacker Chris Hilaire. This kid at 5'9", 190 pounds. Could he be the lead back? That's going to be a question too. You got to find a lead running back. He was an active outside linebacker. This kid is going to be an important two-way player. Another guy at the running back and linebacker spot, Devin Dunham, the sophomore. He's moved around on defense. He definitely shows that he's a versatile player. I'm interested to see what he does, if he's going to move to defensive line or he's going to stay a linebacker. And a couple other guys, outside linebacker, running back Kasai Dubois, the senior. Again, we're going to see where they get placed, but you're talking about a bunch of linebackers, a bunch of running backs. Rampo's going to have some of those guys. They got some depth at the running back and linebacker spot. But offensive lineman, that's what I want to see. Offensive lineman, defensive lineman, Kashawn Frazier, and offensive lineman Shaqui Augusta, who's going to be the anchor for the fronts. And Mars, I'll just round it off, and then we'll go into the discussion. The last 2 teams. Let's go to Ossining, coached by Larry McRae. He's been there since 2019. And 2019 was a tough one. Right? They went 1-6. They're moving from 1AA to the independent league. 2019 was their toughest year since 2016. So the team trying to rebound its program. And offensively, 6 of the 11 starters coming back. They do have to replace their quarterback on the offensive line. 2 out of the 5 offensive linemen are coming back. Defensively, 4 out of the 11 starters coming back. And when I spoke to Coach, they want to spread the ball to different athletes, right? They don't want to, have it key on one football player. And, the big thing was improving the passing game. Defensively, they'll definitely be a little bit bigger up front. Will help them stop the run. Question's going to be on the back end. And when I spoke to Coach about his goals, the team will be young, but he wants to build this culture. He wants to build this program back to a winning program. And when I look at some of the players, it all has to start with their offensive lineman and defensive lineman, Liam Hamilton, the senior. This kid's 6'3", 300 pounds. This kid's a bulldozer. He was a Frank's finest on the offensive line. Powerful hands, can really knock you around, move the line of scrimmage, but he also shows he's got solid feet to pull. Another kid to keep in mind at the quarterback spot, and that's going to be Caden Hallinan, the senior. He was a wide receiver last year. He's moving to quarterback this year. This kid at 6'3", long athlete, going to be an important cog for that, talk about improved passing game. Another kid to keep in mind, linebacker and offensive lineman Vincent Bernardo, the junior. This kid's been on the varsity since his freshman year, and I think he's going to be an X factor on both sides of the ball because he needs to anchor that defense. He needs to make a bunch of plays in the run game. And on the offensive lineman, obviously, you need people around guys like Liam who are going to be important. A couple other guys to keep in mind, Nicholas Gallery, the sophomore, Leonardo Romero, the junior. There's going to be a bunch of young guys. Who is going to step up to the plate? Coach talked about they're going to be young. Who is going to distinguish themselves in the next couple of weeks of practice to get on the football field and make plays for this team? Let's go now to Mount Vernon, Mars. Coached by Mark Murray. This is his first year in 2019 again. They went 0-7. They moved to the independent league from 1AA. We all know Mount Vernon, basketball school, big-time basketball school, right? Can Coach Murray build up a football program there? They brought in someone who's graduated from Mount Vernon. Is going to be, it's someone who knows the area, knows the school, and knows the kids. And, that's going to be the question. We didn't get to speak to Coach. It was hard to distinguish how many starters are coming back and stuff like that. But just a couple guys. He's got to start, to me, on the offensive line. Darren Sloan, the senior. This kid's 6 feet, 315 pounds. Just a mountain of a guy. And another guy, Jalen Bennett, the senior running back. It's going to be important. They got to find a lead back. They got to find a quarterback. And someone on the back end, Tommy Guess, the defensive back. So there's a lot of unknowns with this program. I'm interested to see what Coach Murray does in the next couple of weeks of practice. We'll get a little more, hopefully, enlightenment on that. But I want to see Mount Vernon, build something because the athletes are in the school, right? You see it on the basketball court, right? Can they get the football program to be back to look like a mirror image of the basketball program. And finally, before we wrap up the show, Mars, I want to talk about Blind Brook because Blind Brook actually is going to have, I believe, football this year. I think they're scheduled to play Haldane week 2. I'm interested to see any other games that they come, but Blind Brook having football this year is always big. I always like all the schools to have football and to give these kids an opportunity. I don't know much about Blind Brook, I'll be honest with you right now, but as you know, we'll see these weeks go ahead. I'm interested to see, but I do want to give Blind Brook a shout out because they are going to play some football, and I think it's great that they are.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, of all the teams you kind of mentioned at the very end, I want to look at Peekskill. I think Peekskill is a program that has been struggling in years past, but I think they have a lot of athletes on this team, specifically Jay Tinsley, Elijah Williams. These guys are, I think, breakout athletes, and I think that depending on how much they rely on these guys, offensively 6 out of the 11 returning, defensively 6 out of the 11 returning, it's going to be crucial to help them with that development. You have to always rely on your senior veteran presence moving forward and fill in the remaining gaps with athletes. And I think Pizza can do that. I think they'll obviously be a team that is growing. They have to establish a program and then just build right from there.
Absolutely. And that will wrap it up, Mars. I mean, we went through a lot of teams, a lot of discussion, and football's back, and we're really excited to get into it. But this has been great, and I appreciate everyone for tuning into the show. Again, what our mission is now is we're going to go into now our regular season coverage, and we're going to do a weekly show talking about, all the games coming up. And hopefully we'll get a little bit of, we're thinking about doing a schedule, show. The schedule I know just came out. That one is going to be a TBA, but we're definitely going to be producing high content for you guys coming up for the season. And we just want to thank everyone for tuning in, and we're all going to see you guys very soon.